Broadcasting live from the Zimmer Communications World Headquarters. This is Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
Get ready, pal.
Started my career many years ago across the street at the Supreme Court building as a law clerk to Judge Ann K. Covington. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Judge Covington for her service to the state and for her continued mentorship of me.
This is Wake Up Mid-Missouri, and I am Stephanie Bell. I am joined by Mark Ellinger. You just heard Judge Janet Gooch, who was appointed by Parson to the Missouri Supreme Court yesterday. Mark, that's his third appointment to the Missouri Supreme Court.
Third appointment, and all women, which is creates a majority women on the Missouri Supreme Court. Pretty amazing. We got
some of her background yesterday. So she must have clerked for Judge Ann Covington, who was the first woman on the Missouri Supreme Court, and then and so she has solidified the first ever female majority on the Missouri Supreme Court. What else do we know about Judge Gooch?
She worked for a big law firm, went into the Southern District Court of Appeals. I think there's been a lot of speculation about a Southern District Court of Appeals judge being on because there hasn't been one in a very long time. She's well thought of, got a nice family, very involved in a lot of community events. So I think she's going to be a good addition. I think it's interesting from a political perspective. You realize the first woman ever appointed to the Missouri Supreme Court was appointed by a Republican governor, and now the first majority branch of government in the state of Missouri ever, women majority branch government, is almost solely at the creation of Governor Parson, another Republican.
That's interesting.
Well, and Parson has had so many appointments on the courts and for statewide elected officials, and I think he's gotten a lot of criticism from in his appointments of statewide elected officials that he has appointed men to those roles. So excited to see a majority of women on the Missouri Supreme Court. And also, I think they said the last Southern District appointee might have been Judge Holstein, I was thinking, which was like I think they said 2000 and...
Well, Holstein was appointed, I think, in the 80s, perhaps. He was appointed, I believe, by John Ashcroft.
Close, Steph.
And served for a long time. He was, I think he was the last judge, and maybe in modern era, the only judge appointed who had served in every level of judicial. He had been an associate circuit, a circuit, an appellate court judge, and a Supreme Court judge.
So the year I was remembering was he left in 2002.
There you
he
go.
was the last one to serve. So big deal yesterday with that appointment, and there should not be any more there won't be any more mandatory retirement appointments for Parson, and there shouldn't be any more appointments for a while. So
not on the Supreme Court, but now he's going to have another appointment in the Southern District, and there's lots of vacancies that are out there to be filled in the appellate courts, which, as we're seeing now, is the stepping stone to the Supreme Court.
Have you guys had any experience with Judge Gooch in your law practice?
I have not. Most of our cases, if they originate in Cole County, they either go straight to the Western District or they go straight up to the Supreme Court. So we don't end up in the Southern District, Mark and I personally, much. All right, so...
I've had very little experience in this reporting on anything in the Southern District outside of it seems like a lot of appointees come from there, but that's primarily a Springfield area. It seems like maybe the Greene County cases go there, but I can't remember anything recently from mid-Missouri going into that district for whatever reason.
Well, it splits the lake. If you're in, if I remember correctly, if you're in Miller County, I think, or maybe it's Camden County, you're in the Western District. If you're in the other county, you're in the Southern District, and then it's all the southern part of the state. It's Cape Girardeau, Sykeston, et cetera. It's an odd district. It's very big geographically, but it's got very few people in it.
The boot heel would be included in that too, yes.
And as a result, they just don't get the same kind of high-profile cases that you get out of St. Louis, Kansas City, or more importantly, out of Jefferson City.
Exactly.
Another bizarre shakeup in Missouri politics yesterday. Wesley Bell changed what office he was running for, and the pictures on Twitter were hilarious because he took his old campaign signs and basically cut out a piece of paper and posted over where it said the first office.
Budget friendly.
And is just reusing them. He didn't write in the new office in magic marker, although maybe he could have. But he was announced to run for Senate. Of course, that would have aligned him to run in a primary against Lucas Kuntz, who's originally from the mid-Missouri area. Now he is saying he is running against Cori Bush. I actually think that's pretty big news. I think she's horrible for Missouri, and he would be definitely more moderate than her.
Good, Mark.
Oh, he's not known as a moderate. He is a progressive prosecutor in St. Louis County. Has done some of the innovative, like Reformation things that some of the more far left prosecutors around the country have done. But compared to Cori Bush, I mean, he looks like a red-blooded conservative because she's off the completely wacko end of the deep side of the left.
And that's a point that I've heard at the Capitol too. And he's also very well respected when you talk about Wesley Bell. His father was a police officer. He's taking some heat from some of the progressives on Twitter, but I've also seen some, Doug Beck, for instance, a state senator who's a Democrat from Afton, he liked one of the tweets. So Stacey Newman, by the way, longtime progressive Democratic state representative, very, very progressive. She slammed Cori Bush on Twitter for her comments. But, Mark, did you notice, too, the biggest thing Wesley Bell said at that press conference, he went after the congresswoman for what she said about Israel. And that obviously is going to be an issue there. But in terms of politics, in terms of their issues like abortion, very similar, but their styles are much different.
Well, and she was taking heat from Fox News last week. I guess it's not her husband. Well, it is her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband were leaving a fundraiser in D.C., and Fox News kind of caught them on the street. The audio, I will tell you, is not great, but you see kind of them walking out to the car. She actually gets in the car, and you might hear the door slam, and then they start asking the husband questions.
I do have a question for you. Are you doing, what's your role in the campaign right now?
I don't have a role in the campaign, man.
You don't have a role at all?
My wife just
Because they were reporting you had wages on the campaign for security, and then it was a general wage. I was just wondering what you've been doing on the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, you can Google what it is.
You can Google it. So the initial response was, I don't have a role on the campaign at all. And if you recall, he was paid thousands upon thousands of dollars in her public campaign reports for some sort of security. And I mean, his initial answer, and then he said, oh yeah, that wasn't the right. You kind of see him think through it like, maybe I have a different answer. Hold on a second. Well, you can Google it, and the clip goes on if you want to go find it on the interwebs. But I mean, it's just, that's a bad look for her, and she's received a lot of criticism. He does say, well, there was this ethics complaint and we were cleared. My understanding is there's still kind of a pending, there were 2 different complaints and there's still a pending investigation. So I think Cori Bush is in trouble.
She's popular in the heavily black parts of her district. It's the first district. It's St. Louis City and the northern part of St. Louis County. She's popular there. She'll be, to your point, Brian, she's going to be very unpopular in the West County portions of the district, which are heavily Jewish. But this is the nature, I hate to say it, this is the nature of what we've seen out of that district over the years. There were scandals with Bill Clay, followed by his son Lacey Clay. Cori Bush is having the same scandals. We've seen it inside St. Louis city government consistently. There's this thing in inner cities that has developed around the country. I guess if you go back 100 years, it was Italians and, with the mafia, et cetera. But you see this kind of, we're going to shake down the system to benefit our families. And that continues to go on across the board. And Cori Bush is just another example of it. The irony is most people up there don't care about that.
And and again, she is popular. The media, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch always talks about Congresswoman Cori Bush. What they forget is that Blaine Luetkemeyer, Jason Smith, and Ann Wagner also, and Sam Graves has Lincoln County. They also represent, but they don't get the press in St. Louis. But that district, Mark, is protected under the Voting Rights Act, the VRA. It's been the 5th over in Kansas City is not. So very, very, I've never seen it. It's never happened in my lifetime, a Republican winning, but Bell would have to, he'd have to run an interesting campaign. It'd be interesting to see what he does. It was a long shot. Nobody thought he had a chance to take on McCullough. He did that. No, this is different. So we will see. But certainly, I think the other thing is with the Senate race, Carla May right now, to me, is the front runner for the Democratic side. She is, and we saw her speak at Governor Parsons' prayer breakfast, but I think she'll beat Lucas Coons. I really do.
I agree. I think Lucas Coons is a terrible candidate for the state. She'll do a good job. She'll align a lot of folks in St. Louis and Kansas City with her. And she's popular. When I was doing the Senate Reapportionment Commission, she showed up to one of our hearings, and Cori Bush showed up to one of our hearings, and both of them had real energy from the crowd, the fact that they were in the room. So they have some personalities that draw people to them. I've known Carla May for a number of years. She's great. I mean, she's just a great person. She's fun to be around. She's,
Wasn't she formerly in news media? Was she a journalist?
I think you're maybe thinking of Barbara Washington.
Oh, I think I am. Okay.
Barbara Washington. Carla May, of course, long time, but she was a state lawmaker, took on Jacob Hummel, who was a incumbent former Democrat leader in the Missouri House, and beat him in a primary for the Senate. So she's formidable.
And not in a district that is overwhelmingly minority. It's a real swing district there, and she did a heck of a job in that campaign.
Yes.
All right, back closer to home. John, what do we know about this Osage escapee? We didn't have much details yesterday on this issue, but I believe... just tell us what you know.
This is the guy, if Wake Up family members might remember, we reported that Alex Stieferman was awaiting trial for stealing cars, initially from State Technical College and a car lot in Lynn. He was in the jail. Now he's accused of assaulting two jailers and getting out of the Osage County Jail in Lynn about 9:30 Sunday night. They caught him about 3 hours later when somebody in Lynn spotted a suspicious person walking down the street. But this is the same guy who was jailed for alleged car theft at both State Tech and at one of the car dealerships there. Kind of a weird story.
So you escape from jail and then you just casually walk down the street? Is that what we were doing?
3 hours of freedom, Amy. Looking for a
sharpest tools in the toolbox.
There you go.
Gosh. All right. Well, we are running out of time a little bit here, but I do want to mention in the Court of Appeals in Kansas City yesterday, the abortion initiatives were before the court. Mark, 30 seconds. What do we know?
So two different cases, one on the fiscal note, one on the ballot summary. The ballot summary is the one that most people care the most about. Judge Beadham down in Cole County rewrote it because the Secretary of State's language he found it to be inflammatory and biased and misleading. The court seemed pretty skeptical of the Attorney General's and Secretary of State's appeal on that. I anticipate that the language that Judge Beadham did is ultimately going to be affirmed or minorly
United Kingdom to advance the administration's work to ensure the safe and responsible use of AI. On Wednesday, the Vice President will deliver a major speech in London outlining the Biden-Harris administration's vision for the future of AI and the steps we are taking to realize that vision.
Kamala is in charge of our vision on AI. That was KJP telling us about the latest executive order out of the Biden administration yesterday. If you recall, wasn't she supposed to be the border czar too? Now she's the AI czar, Mark.
Border czar, gun czar, AI czar. She's gonna be the czar of everything that doesn't work.
And
I think this is the first time the word vice president and intelligence were used in the same sentence.
She's not been the best on AI, has she, Hannah? We have a clip of her. What was she saying? She did her normal Kamala thing, and she said something like, AI is 2 letters, and it stands for artificial intelligence. We're like, thanks for that.
And her job is now done as AI czar.
Thanks for that very intelligent comment. So that is coming out of the big news coming out of the Biden administration yesterday. We also, Mark, you said you heard Mark Alford on Fox this morning on the Israel funding.
Yeah, Fox Business this morning had Mark Alford on. He did a really nice job and talked about Israel funding. They're moving a standalone bill through the House. They have that new rule that every bill will go for 72 hours so everybody can read it. They actually introduced it yesterday, so they're already into, I think, almost 24 hours into the bill. So they plan on moving it. It's a clean Israel funding bill for about $16 billion and send that over to the Senate. And, they're hoping that they just get a clean bill for Israel. And if they come back to Ukraine, they take that separately. And Alford even had some pretty good comments about Ukraine that, is a very measured, thoughtful response on that issue.
Now, I heard on that funding that actually the new speaker is saying, okay, if we're going to do this funding, we have to cut somewhere else. And that they're talking about cutting some of the Democrats' IRA provisions, specifically where they were going to beef up the IRS, and that might imperil some of this Israel funding. And that might be a problem for the speaker going forward. Is that a good move by Johnson or not?
I think that's a great idea. Anything we can do to defund the IRS is good in my book, just to start with. But you can't just continually fund and not cut somewhere. I think that's a good idea. I think there's a lot of opportunities for cutting in the pork that the Biden administration's jammed through in the last few years.
Well, and when I was originally reading about Mike Johnson, I said in order to earn the Stephanie stamp of approval, we know he's got the conservative street cred on the social issues. We know that, but I said I'm going to be waiting to see what he does on the spending. And so I was really pleased to see that he said, look, if we're going to go out and spend some money, it's got to come from somewhere. And yes, I was especially pleased to see it coming from the IRS. Also, we are learning more about George Santos. Apparently, we should expect a vote on his I think they're going to vote to expel him sometime this week. I liked the Washington Post called him truth averse. Is that the new term for I'm not lying, I'm just truth averse?
That's very flowery.
It is. I do think the new speaker had something really interesting to say. He said, hey, he's only been charged, he's not been convicted. We need to be careful about expelling people and let due process play out. Next up, we will be talking about subpoenas coming out of the Senate Democrats. And then, sorry, my timing is up.
Pregnant pause.
I was so close.
Pause for dramatic effect.
The Santos thing's interesting, however, because the motion to throw him out is sponsored by Republicans, some of the New York Republican congresspeople who are concerned about how his staying in the House will affect their reelection options.
But do you think he should be expelled?
No. I think you have to allow some type of due process play out, or he can resign if he really thinks he's done something wrong.
All right. How about now we go to the break? I was just a little bit. I'm so worried about being late. I'm trying.
for us to make sure that we are doing everything we can to have fiscally conservative leaders at the local level. We need that, and we need law and order. We need people who are going to promote safety in our cities. And again, Democrats have controlled most of the major cities in this country for several decades.
This is Stephanie Bell. I am hosting this morning Wake Up Mid-Missouri with co-host Mark Ellinger. And I've got John Marsh here with me.
Good morning.
And producer Hannah.
Hola.
And you just heard from Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson, a newly minted Republican. How long has he been a Republican, Mark?
Since the middle of September.
Nice.
He was elected as a nonpartisan mayor. They have nonpartisan elections down there, and just announced he had been a longtime Democrat before then, and announced he had to become a Republican.
And now he's out announcing that he's started a new association. What's he doing?
So for years, there has been the Democrat Mayors Association. It's very powerful. It has big meetings. As I think you heard in the clip, the vast majority of the major cities in the U.S., the mayors are Democrats. They have total control over most of our metropolitan areas. He is starting a counter effort, which is the Republican Mayors Association. A lot of people remember Francis Suarez ran for about 5 minutes for president, who's the mayor of Miami-Dade. Those are the two Republicans now that have major mayor's seats in the United States. And I think there's a lot of smaller jurisdictions that have Republican mayors that don't have that venue that these big Democrat Mayors Association events can do.
It blows my mind that we never, this is pretty standard. You have, if you get on the statewide level, there's the Republican Attorney Generals Association. There's so it just baffles me, even among smaller town mayors, that they didn't say hey guys, let's all get together and work together.
I guess it shows you how few Republican mayors there are out there. I mean, that concept of things like Republican attorney generals, Republican governors, that's a more modern concept that didn't go on 150 years ago. Since the Democrats have seized control of most of the major metropolitan areas, that's the same time this advent of these politically aligned associations of elected officials. And now you've got, out of the top 100 cities in the United States, something over 80% of them are controlled by Democrats.
Really?
And I think Dallas is the only one in the top 20 that has a Republican.
Well, Mayor Fitzwater, if you're listening, we did check out their website, and it's pretty swanky for being a new organization, but I think you can actually get on there, and especially some of our other smaller towns around mid-Missouri. I think, this is something, our Ashland mayor, I think this is something that, could be a real benefit to mayors and hopefully other local government officials. Of course, Missouri, we've got a lot more conservatives at the county level, for example. I think they're taking other folks from local governments.
The other thing I think is, if you look at the big cities, look at St. Louis and Kansas City, they elect a Republican or a Democrat mayor. I mean, they're all Democrats, obviously. And then you come out of the big cities and everybody wants to be nonpartisan because they don't want to have to say they're a Republican or Democrat. I mean, Ron Fitzwater, who's a friend of ours and is very much a Republican, is a nonpartisan mayor of Jefferson City. And I think that's part of their plan, the Democrats' plan, to be able to stifle Republicans. If Republicans ever get in control, well, now it's time for nonpartisan elections. If Democrats get in control, hey, this is just the voters speaking.
I like this idea. I think we should have had one of these organizations all along, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Hopefully we can get more conservatives at the local level because the Democrats are just destroying our cities like we talked about this morning with the leadership in St. Louis. Also, big SCOTUS news yesterday, and I told Hannah we wouldn't get super nerdy.
I am on nerd watch.
All right,
okay.
do you have a buzzer? If it just gets too much, you can just...
I installed a zapper in your chair.
All right, we're going to try to keep it away from that, but we did hear news out of from the Senate Democrats in Washington, D.C. yesterday that they plan to issue subpoenas to our Supreme Court justices over, and how long have they been harping on this now? A year or more? They want to issue subpoenas to Harlan Crow and now also to Leonard Leo over this big money, travel, gifts, whatever. They've been pushing for a code of ethics conduct, a code of conduct or an ethics code, and that hasn't really been successful.
You said this guy's name is Leonard Leo?
Yes.
So Leo, almost.
There you go.
I never even thought about that. Yeah. Mark and I have had the opportunity to meet him before. He's very involved in the Federalist Society, one of the founders, and has been instrumental in that, and of course instrumental in some of the court selection issues, which is exactly why he is their target.
And he went out and left the Federalist Society and created a nonprofit entity that is really designed to be a counterweight to what the Democrats have done in trying to elect good Republican lawyers and to work on influencing the judiciary across the country. I think the Democrats got ahead of us on that. We're catching up. But he's had such great success when he was at the Federalist Society because the Trump administration basically allowed him a seat at the table to help pick some of these judges. And, we've had pretty good court turnout as a result of that.
Isn't this the whole cycling back to Dick Durbin and his crew going after Clarence Thomas?
It's the same story with a different cover on it. That's all they really care about.
And for what it's worth, Crow's office did respond, called the subpoena politically motivated. And of course, in the past, Leonard Leo and some of the other folks' names have just said, no, we're not going to really participate in this process, which is why Dick Durbin wants an official subpoena out of the committee. So also, the Supreme Court heard a big case yesterday, and they've got some big cases today. What did they hear yesterday, Mark?
So yesterday they heard a case, it's called Cully versus Marshall, which is about the seizing of your car and under the Civil Forfeiture Act, where you can't get your car back. And, I think people rely on their vehicles. And if you seize somebody's car, you can throw them into poverty. They can't get their kids to school. There can be health consequences, a lot of financial consequences. And this is a case that's been floating around for a while. Police officers will stop somebody. They won't find a crime. They can't arrest anybody. But they'll seize the car on the basis of, well, there's a suspicion that there's a crime, and now it's your problem to get the car back. And the Supreme Court's taken up. There's two different cases. They're back to back. I think the court's going to change some things on these civil forfeitures, which is really kind of an egregious taking of property with no due process.
I sure hope they do. I mean, there are some wild stories out there of people using forfeiture and it just ruining people's lives, and ultimately it being completely unnecessary or unsupported by any real serious allegations. So
you go back decades to the initiation of the war on drugs. A lot of that, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really what made the Civil Forfeiture Acts become very popular, was the war on drugs. But it's gotten out of control, and there are departments and in some states that fund substantive portions of law enforcement out of seizing people's property.
We are also expecting today there will be arguments at the Supreme Court over social media. Now, social media is a hot topic for the Supreme Court this year. They've got two cases teed up for today, and those are about blocking people from social media sites. Really interesting. The other two cases are related to social media content moderation laws. Those come out of Texas and Florida. Those cases will be heard later this term. And then, of course, the Missouri case, Missouri v. Biden, and that's about the communication between the social media companies and the Biden administration, and that is also set to be heard. But yesterday, we go back to the blocking, and that's an issue that's kind of familiar to Missourians and mid-Missourians because Representative Reich a couple years ago got tied up when she decided to block somebody on social media, and ultimately she deleted her Twitter and said, I'm just not going to fuss with it.
Well, and that was a case that she blocked him on Twitter, and that she lost in federal court. And then they appealed to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. The 8th Circuit Court of Appeals said she's totally entitled to block. So it'll be really interesting to see how the Supreme Court handles that, because you actually have at least one circuit, the 8th Circuit, that has said you're entitled to block people off your social media.
And of course, Trump was often criticized for blocking people, and there was some litigation over that. But this is really supposed to really lay down the law about when it's okay to block somebody, when it might not be okay to block somebody. And we get really serious, Hannah, when we're talking about the Supreme Court. But I always have to laugh when it gets a little bit silly. So in one of these cases, it was a city manager in Michigan, and he decided, this was during the COVID-19 response, and he was blocking someone because they were posting creepy smiley emojis on his Facebook page. And that was,
I mean, I've blocked people for less. So.
I mean, you have like an emoji filter on our page, right?
I had to, because we got inundated with like porn bots one time, and they were commenting all sorts of eggplant emojis, and I had to filter out a bunch of the emojis because it was getting rid of the dirty comments at the same time. So
yeah, I mean, social media gets a lot of criticism, but I do think that it's one way for our elected officials to communicate with us, right? And it's a way for them to be transparent, a way for them to interact with each other, and for us to see, what's going on. The first kind of response we heard out of our own House Speaker over the allegations. I mean, there was a lot of sparring on Twitter where we learned something that we wouldn't otherwise have known. So I think it's a good way for them to reach people. And I think I would hate to see any sort of policy that caused our elected officials to do what Representative Reich did and just say, you know what, it's not worth it.
Well, you also have to take into account different sets. You've got official accounts,
yes,
and you have campaign accounts, and you have personal accounts. And the standard is probably slightly different for each of those three. But clearly, if it's an official account, it's going to be hard to argue you get to block people off of an official account.
Mm-hmm.
We see this with a lot of local governments that try to block people off of their local government Facebook page because they don't like what people are saying. And that's fundamentally censorship, and that's a real problem. But if it's your campaign account or if it's your personal account, I think you have your own free speech rights and your rights of association. Who do you want to associate with?
And especially, I mean, none of us are this popular where we have, thousands and thousands and thousands of followers. But,
there was that one time, though, that you stepped in it with Nicki Minaj fans.
That's very true. And my phone basically, it turned into like a brick. It was pinging so fast. I couldn't do anything, and it killed my battery in like 40 minutes. And so I do, on some of these larger accounts where the trolls are so bad that then you are prevented from being able to utilize it. How are you supposed to go forward? Even on a more official account when they just, they are censoring you then because you can't really do anything when they take over your account.
What about the Donald Trump thing where he was blocking, people on Twitter who criticized him? I guess this whole thing kind of revolves back to a First Amendment question.
If Trump was blocking everyone that criticized him on Twitter, that's like a full-time job within itself.
Right.
I can't imagine having the patience to block that many people.
Right. And Mark brings up a good point. And John, you with the First Amendment, of course, if it's the government blocking people, then we do have a First Amendment. If it's not the government, then it really shouldn't be. But then the question is this a government account? Is this not? And I think that's where maybe we get into this new case with Missouri v. Biden and what the Attorney General is saying, because they're saying, well, it wasn't the government. But Bailey's argument is, but wait, it was a third party acting for the government. So at what point do you, by taking orders, become the government? These are all really fascinating questions. And I think we're going to, obviously with the 5 cases pending before SCOTUS this term, we're going to learn a lot.
And social media is under fire in the legislature across the country. So I think this is just part of that trend.
All right. Mark, you watched the Chiefs game. There was like an
acquire candy. So let's settle the debate of how every candy ranks. I did it. I rank them. Reese's cups are clearly best.
A little Halloween fun for you this morning on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
It's a hot take.
Happy Halloween. That is not a hot take. It is decided. Reese's are number one. That is Ben Rector out with a fun Halloween song yesterday. He goes through his entire ranking of Halloween candies, and it finally gets to the worst, which we may reveal later. So I don't care what you think the best one is because it's clearly Reese's, Mark.
Undisputed, the heavyweight champion of the world, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, 100%.
All right, and do we pronounce it wrong or do other people? Because like Travis Kelce says Reese's, and I think it's Reese's.
Well, Travis Kelce is also a football player who has been hit in the head many times. So can't hold that against him.
Well, either way, it's going to be a cold Halloween. Is this like a record? It's going to be, the low tonight is 19.
Yeah, they're talking about we could break the record
Really?
for Halloween.
The record was 22.
Oh my goodness.
And it was 1993. I think it was 22 degrees.
Our hope is to like trick or treat a little bit while the sun's still out and then just bribe my kids with like desserts and other candy and finish up early because that is a miserable trick or treat experience.
I've seen a lot of parents online doing something called Switch Witch. Have you seen that?
No.
Basically, if you don't want your kids hopped up on Halloween candy until Easter, they set their bucket of candy outside their bedroom door on the night of Halloween, and the parents replace it with like a toy or something like that.
Oh, you can like buy a toy with your candy. I like this.
Yeah, they call it the Switch Witch.
So it's called bribing your children.
Kinda,
I love
sorta.
it. That's what we've all
As
done.
opposed to just eating their candy.
I'm definitely going to do that. So yeah, text us at 573-874-9390. I want to know what you think the worst candy is.
Almond Joy.
No.
Yes.
It's not. It's like the best.
No,
Almond Joy's great.
Almond Joy for me would be number 2
You
right
two
after
would
Reese's.
like Almond Joy. John,
we're
get a load
old.
of these guys.
Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
You all are ridiculous. All right, so we're on a little bit of a music kick here. We heard the song from Ben Rector. Also, there's a new Beatles song out this week on Thursday. They used AI to recreate this new song. Now and Then. It will be their final song, but get prepared. That will be out on Thursday. Very exciting. Mark, you're a big Beatles fan. Are you looking forward to it, or does it feel like kind of...
I think it'll be interesting to see there. Peter Jackson, the guy who did the Lord of the Rings movies, doing a 12-minute video on how they put it together, which will be kind of fun to see also.
Oh, I like
Yeah,
that.
they said they mastered it off a cassette recording.
Really?
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
A what?
incredible.
Off
A cassette, little
Come on,
audio
Hannah.
cassette things.
But I guess John Lennon actually laid down the original part of the song, and they dubbed in some George Harrison because they both passed away. And then Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney came in and added live tracks to it.
I love it. All right. And also, one of our favorites, Travis Kelce, apparently got majorly trolled at the Chiefs game, and it was a big loss. And Mark, you're smiling. Did you like the fact that they trolled him?
I thought it was hysterical. I thought the
Rude.
Denver Bronco fans, it was great that they did that. And he didn't have a good game. It's the interesting thing. There's this statistic out there. They were talking about it, how when Taylor Swift is there, he has these incredible numbers on the field. And when she's not there, he had 58 yards of receptions, which is pretty paltry for him.
I mean, the joke writes itself. Come on.
Right.
But
Shake it off.
to be aired on live television.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to have contests over the next couple of months on social media for folks to win tickets to go see this live.
Ooh.
I don't know how you sell tickets to making the moon disappear, but
Well, can't you just look up in the sky, or is that the day of a lunar eclipse?
There
Maybe,
you go.
In the end, he's got the greatest disappearing act of all.
Well,
he
and
had national television coverage, and then his career disappeared.
oh, ouch.
He's
Along with the Statue of Liberty.
And I've posted on the Wake Up Mid-Missouri Facebook page, what should he make disappear next?
He is 67 years old, so he's getting up there.
We've already gotten one vote that Steve says he should make the national debt disappear, and then Steve will believe that he's the real deal.
Wouldn't that be really nice? I think we've got some other votes for certain candies that he should make disappear.
Almond Joy.
No, Almond Joy is the best.
But candy corn, we can agree, should disappear.
There you go.
Unless it's mixed with peanuts, and then it's delicious.
Isn't candy corn basically just frosting?
Yes.
Ugh.
And wax.
All right, text us the worst candy, 573-874-9390.
Or things that David Copperfield should make disappear next.
Or both.
Or both, yeah.
Both, I like it.
They might overlap.
I like it. All right, well, Missouri has a new process this year for caucusing. We have eliminated our presidential primary vote. Joined by co-host Mark Ellinger this morning. Now, you would be surprised, I'm sure, to learn that the sports world doesn't infiltrate my Twitter feed very often. So it has to be something, pretty big going on. Certainly the Taylor Travis thing is all over all of my feeds.
That's
as it
infiltrated all areas of life, not just sports.
It really has. But yesterday, I'm prepping for the show, a little behind the scenes here. I'm checking out Twitter, looking for all the latest news, and this sports debate is just all I can see in my Twitter feed. And I'm thinking, what? And it's about something that happened a couple days ago, actually. And I did say injury before the break, and it was a fatal injury. It was a game I believe it was in the UK. And initially, the reports were coming out, and they're saying, okay, so they're skating on the ice. There's a hip check. This guy's feet fly way up in the air. Matt Petgrave's feet fly way up in the air, and his skates strike Adam Johnson. Adam Johnson ultimately dies from the injury. The video is very gory, and people on Twitter had started to slow it down and said, hey, why are we calling this a tragic accident? This almost looks, intentional or negligent or something. And we're pointing out that I guess Matt Petgrave has a lot of the most, I think, time in the penalty box of any player, and saying he should really be charged with manslaughter. Now, I don't know the criminal laws in the UK or anything like that, but Mark, I had mentioned it to you, and you said actually it reminded you a lot of something that you remember watching live on TV. I bet Brian remembers this too.
Yeah, so back in 1989, when I was in school, Blues were playing the Sabres, and Kent Malarchuk was the goalie for the Sabres, and they went sliding in on a play. And the thing I remember most about it was he sat up on his knees and lifted up, and blood spurted out, and he grabbed his neck and tried to hold the blood in. There's a real famous picture of him in the puddle of blood there. But the after story of that was the trainer for the Sabres was a Vietnam vet medic.
That's right.
Who the second he saw the skates go in, didn't even wait for the blood, was over the rail and was running on the ice while they were still technically playing hockey, and got there and saved his life. And he's completely fine now. They talk about
came back.
PTSD.
Yes, I remember. He came back and played the next month.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, he did. And that was Steve. You guys are all absolutely right. Great memory. Terrible. And it could have been much worse, but you're absolutely right about the Vietnam veteran. And I believe it was Steve Tuttle that was the Blues player involved in that, as I recall. That one, the one you're referring to, Mark, and I can't speak for the thing in UK because, it's obviously there's a lot of debate. The one I do remember is 1989, and that, as I recall, that was just a freak accident. There was nothing intentional. No one blamed, and I believe it was Steve Tuttle. But you're right about it was very, very gory, and he could have died. And you're right, the trainer ran on the ice, and they were still. Well, the puck was still in play technically for a few seconds, but yeah, it was a very scary incident, and thankfully he was okay. But it was rough.
And hockey is a fairly rough sport to start with, and I'm not sure that you can really talk about how many penalty minutes a single player has to get to a manslaughter charge. That's a lot of leaps to get there.
Right.
But they sharpen their skates to get better traction on the ice. Those hockey skates, if you go to a local place and rent some skates and skate, they're nowhere near as sharp as the professionals have. And there's been years they've been talking about requiring all players to wear neck guards. The players hate it because it limits their mobility and their ability to look around on the ice. But this is, I think, going to reinvigorate that discussion about wearing neck guards for player protection. And who knows, we'll get, maybe that'll be a change that the leagues will come up with.
Well, and I think when it comes to sports, you can slow any play down and, pick it apart and make it something that it's not. But it all boils down to it's just two athletes playing a game that they both signed up to play. And I think it's a little crazy to insinuate that this guy intentionally set out to essentially slit this player's throat. I think that's crazy.
And if you see the video, it's happening so fast.
Right.
I will say this. If he intentionally tried to do this, that guy's he's the David Copperfield magician, because that's an unbelievable move to do at that speed, because if you see it in full speed, it's fractions of a second that this occurs in.
Yes, it is.
Well, stop and think. Brian can think back to the days of the enforcers in the NHL with, Dave Schultz, the Hammer, with the Flyers and all these guys. That was their role.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Well, the 70s, the 60s, of course, the Blues had some really good years. But you guys are right about the enforcers. I mean, there was a guy that his name was Harold Snips. I don't know if people remember him. He played for the Blackhawks. And, I mean, the guy looked like he didn't look like a hockey player, but he was very physical. And you had Willie Plett, and you had Bob Probert that played for the Detroit Red Wings.
Terry O'Reilly.
Yeah, I mean, in these guys, basically their job was to fight, and they did. But I don't ever remember, for sure, none of them ever deliberately injured. They had a code, and they didn't. Once they would pummel a player, it was over. And then at the end of a series, especially in the playoffs, they would shake hands. But this is, I think, Mark, you bring up a very good point about that neck guard. And I know they don't like it because of mobility, but before that, I feel like it's a safety issue. I feel like they should be required to do it. That's a player's issue, and I know the union probably would have some concern about their freedom because it is going to impact their mobility. But something like that, and the freak thing that happened with the Buffalo Sabres, that was awful. That was it. And this other thing was just as awful.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. I think it is going to spark a debate, especially, I mean, he was so young, former NHL player, and I saw a statement yesterday. He was newly engaged, and there were statements. So just a tragedy any way you look at it. John, for tomorrow's show, let us know what's going on. Who do you have coming on?
Hey, we've got guest host, State Representative Dave Griffith of Jefferson City. He'll be joining us for the entire show. Then we'll be talking with Cole County Presiding Commissioner Sam Bushman about some of the pressing things there and kind of a cast of thousands. So we're also even talking to the Lieutenant Governor's office, trying to see what we can cook up in that regard.
Nice. Well, I mean, we talk about the holidays, right? Today's Halloween and how fast once Halloween's over, then it's just Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then before you know it, we're celebrating New Year's. And, I think when we think about our legislature, we're like, oh, they're not back till January. But pre-filing starts in the beginning of December. Their caucus meetings are coming up here shortly. So although it feels like a long way away, that process is going to start picking up very quickly.
Well, and let's be honest, who listening right now is going to put up their Christmas tree tomorrow?
Negative.
No way.
Wow. I wasn't saying that I was doing it. I just know there's people who on November 1st go full into Christmas mode.
Yeah, and they do have right now, a lot of places do have their Christmas decorations up. There's no doubt about that. And the pre-filing, you're right, does start on 12/1. This ethics committee hearing that was just scheduled, I didn't see it. I'm pretty good about checking the Missouri House website for hearings. It's coming up on November 8th, which is not that far away. That will be one that's interesting. I thought Mark and Jonathan made an interesting point about and you did too, Stephanie, about the Senate race involving Caleb Rowden's seat. And the one thing we should point out is that whether it's Weber or another Democrat, and he's the only prominent one right now I'm aware of that's running, Stephen Weber, the former state representative, the fact they've taken Cooper County, and it used to be Howard, and then it was Randolph, and now Cooper, that is a big blow for Republicans because they could lose maybe 51-49, but they would pick they did very well in the rural county. They don't have that anymore, and it's going to be hard to beat Stephen Weber. The argument Republicans say is he's going to be, if he is the senator, he's going to be in the super minority. That's what they'll say, and therefore he won't have much clout.
And it doesn't hurt Republicans that much. The map will stay fundamentally the same. There'll still be a super majority. It'll hurt Boone County. You had Kurt Schaefer, who was head of appropriations for 8 years as the senator from Boone County. Now you've had Caleb Rowden, who's now, was the majority leader and the pro tem. So you've had immense political power that has looked after Columbia and particularly looked after the University of Missouri. Let's be honest. That's the flagship that comes out of here. No matter who the Democrat is, they will have no power. And you will now have to rely on the good graces of Republicans who like the university for other reasons and not because it's in their jurisdiction or in their district. I think, Columbians are going to vote for a Democrat. We know that. It's kind of a foregone conclusion. You heard Jonathan say that too. But in the long run, Columbians are they're cutting their nose off to spite their face by putting a Democrat into that position because money is the lifeblood of that university, and there's not going to be anybody there to defend it.
Meanwhile, the texter's blowing up over folks having my back over putting their Christmas tree up.
Yes.
Either tomorrow, Marissa says she actually took the day off work tomorrow to put up her Christmas decorations.
Yes.
And then we've got Brad and Tara all saying their trees are going up this weekend.
What?
And we actually have a texter weighing in saying that their neighbors have had their tree up for at least 3 weeks already.
Oh my goodness. That is a bit much. These are the same people who drink pumpkin spice lattes in like
Rude.
August, I think, like
Rude.
you do.
Well, go to Hallmark in July for the new ornament unveiling.
Yeah, right. Mark, you bring up a good point about the university, though, and I forgot to mention this earlier this morning. We were talking about Parsons' new appointee to the Supreme Court, Judge Gooch, and although she is representing the Southern District, she did go to the University of Missouri-Columbia for law school, and I believe she also went to Stevens for undergrad. So some mid-Missouri representation there, and just shows there's a lot of University of Missouri-Columbia law grads now on the courts. So that's always nice to see, and that university is so important. Also, big court news out yesterday, Western District, big oral argument on the abortion initiatives. We heard a little bit from John Ratliff about how he might think that would affect candidates in the race if it ends up on the ballot. But he doesn't seem 100% convinced that they're going to have the resources. But what are we looking for? What are we going to see from the court?
Well, I mean, obviously the ballot measure completely changes the history in the state, or modern history in the state, on abortion. The ballot language that was written by the Secretary of State was, thrown out immediately by the judge. I think we were all quite skeptical at it. It was a political ballot title. Let's just be very candid about it. It served its purpose. The Secretary of State got a lot of mileage off of it and is still getting mileage off of it. Court of Appeals is not going to reinstate his language in any way, shape, or form.
And by his, you mean Ashcroft?
The Ashcroft's language.
Okay.
Circuit Judge John Beadham out of Cole County changed it. That's most likely going to be the language if it goes on the ballot, but it'll certainly be on the petition. There's another set of petitions out there that we're not talking a lot about, which is kind of a more moderate abortion rights petition, which, if it gets on the ballot, I think it has substantive consequences, because that particular petition will get 60-70% of the vote in the state. And that could create a lot of impact on an election, particularly if it's in November, where you're looking at turnout in some of these swing races.
And could raise additional legal questions about competing measures on the ballot, which we don't have time to get into now, but maybe we can nerd out on that.
That's super law nerd stuff there.
Nerd alert.
Nerd out on that later. So big consequences here in Missouri.
would be all, except for this.
Halloween ends. The final chapter. We've been polling our listeners and our friends about their Halloween memories. Eric says, I went to a costume party dressed as a whoopee cushion. I ended up getting tackled to the ground by a swarm of 8-year-olds. They all jumped up and down on my chest because they were trying to make the farting noises come out. Sarah tells us, I dressed up as a fortune teller at a party. A guy comes up to me and asked me to read his palm. I told him he'd get drunk and have a good time. Came back an hour later, told me I was the real deal, right on the money, fell over a table and threw up on me.
Oh.
And finally, Stephanie says, Stephanie B, no less, a different Stephanie B.
Uh-oh.
1 year, all the kids seemed to be skipping our house. We couldn't figure out why. We had great candy. Decorations were clearly visible and our lights were turned on. Turned out the neighbor's black cat got hit by a car, managed to crawl up our steps, and die on the front porch. Now you know the rest of that story.
That's got to be some sort of like bad omen right there.
There you go.
100%. There's a black cat in my neighborhood, and I hate whenever I see it. I don't know why it freaks me out, but
better be nice to him today.
for sure.
Don't let it cross your path.
I know. What's the official rule? I've heard a lot of debate about leaving the bowl of candy on your porch if you're not home. Is that that's what you're supposed to do, right? Or no?
First greedy kid comes, gets a whole bowl of candy, and that's that.
What a great deal.
I was going to say, the husband and I, we've kind of been Halloween Scrooges the last couple years.
Well, it's expensive. I think the latest report from Fox Business is that candy's up 13% over last year, like 1 year.
Yeah, I was at the big box store the other day and saw the big bag of candy by the checkout was $26.
Wow.
I just buy full-size candy bars and hand them out to
Are
kids.
you kidding?
I'm the full-size candy bar family.
And what's your address?
Yeah.
We started doing that years ago, and now it's like, it's great, you know?
Well, so
let's do it.
Every once in a while, I tune in to the New Heights podcast with the Kelsey brothers.
Yes.
And last week's episode, Travis was talking about how he was the kid growing up where if they just put a bowl out with a sign that said, please take one, and there was no adult supervision, he's emptying the bowl, right?
100%.
And then later on, he goes on to whine about how he got duped by a bunch of 12-year-olds. One of the first years he put candy out at his house. He said in the neighborhood that he lives in Kansas City, everyone kind of knows that he lives there. So he didn't hand it out himself, but he left it out on his porch. And he said the very first group of 12-year-olds that came by his house cleaned out all of his king-size candy bars, and he felt duped. And his brother was quick to point out, like, that's called karma because you did that to people as kids.
And his brother said he was the kid who would go and take one. I think I'm skeptical of that.
Well, just remember, Travis Kelsey says he loves candy corn.
Well,
that might answer a question right
Not
there.
everyone can be perfect.
It is. We are having a massive debate on the texter, and we can't keep up. We are going to try to reply, but you all are very divided on what the worst candy is. Candy corn sparks a lot of controversy. Of course, everyone knows Reese's is best, and second in line, Hannah, Almond Joy. And
Where? We're reading different text messages because I have not seen that.
Not up for debate. But what I think I'm most shocked about is this Christmas tree debate, because a lot of you are putting up your Christmas trees this weekend. But you bring up a good point, and this is a popular thing here on the show, is talking about how stupid deer are, right? But we are in the middle of deer season. And so you all said, hey, this is the only free weekend between youth season and regular season. So I got to put that tree up because otherwise, we are too busy. So that's a fair point, I think.
If you're getting up early in the morning or late at night driving, it's always deer season.
There you go. And the body shops will love it.
All right. Well, coming up next, we are going to
are going to appear at your door to acquire candy. So let's settle the debate of how every candy ranks. I did it. I rank them. Reese's cups are clearly best. In order here are the red.
We're having a little fun this Halloween morning on Wake Up Mid-Missouri. I'm Stephanie Bell, and I'm joined by co-host Mark Ellinger.
Good morning, y'all.
And Hannah has ignited a debate on the texter.
My favorite thing to do.
And so that's a Christmas Halloween song. Is that what we're going to call that? But
kind of, sort of.
We're having two simultaneous debates on what the worst candy is and what whether or not you should be putting your Christmas tree up this weekend. And people are very divided. There are a lot more people than I thought who are decorating for Christmas this weekend, which
makes me just so happy.
I consider too early. All right. Well, we are excited to be joined by Chris Grahn-Howard. His current position is the budget policy coordinator for the St. Louis County Council, but in his position with us today, he is the chair of the GOP Convention Rules Committee. Hannah, we were talking about being nerds earlier, and you always...
Yup.
Chris is in Mark and I's camp. We're all... because sounds like a pretty nerdy committee.
Great. We're outnumbered, John.
All right, but he is the architect of this new system that we have to implement in the spring here, the new caucus system, and we wanted... I don't know that we might be bringing it to you here first. It hasn't yet been widely talked about. I know the rules were recently approved. I've seen a kind of timeline of the dates. So welcome to the show, Chris. Give us the general process for how these rules were developed.
Well, first off, good morning, y'all. I hope y'all having a good day on this crisp morning. In previous years, we've always had a caucus.
Yes.
Right. And the purpose of that caucus was to elect delegates to the Congressional District Convention and the Missouri Republican Party State Convention, where they would then elect delegates to go to the Republican National Convention, make changes to the platform, things like that. In 2016, for that cycle, the Missouri Republican Party, used a presidential preference primary to determine how we allocated those delegates to the Republican National Convention. So 2 years ago, when the legislature took out, when they passed the Voter Integrity Act, they also took out the presidential preference primary. There was a big debate in this last legislative session to put it back in, and it failed. I don't know what it says, but when the chairman of the Democrat Missouri Party and the Republican chairman of the Missouri Republican Party go to Jeff City and say, please put this back in, legislature failed to get that done. So now the caucus now has to be the guide for how we allocate our national delegates, which it didn't used to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think originally, the reason for taking it out was it's not without cost. And so it's and it was non-binding. Even though the caucus decided we're going to follow with however people vote, the caucus could have decided, actually, we're not going to follow that. And so since it was non-binding, the argument was, let's get rid of it because it's costly. But I think a lot of people are going to show up to the polls and think, I think people are confused. I think people have always thought that their vote was binding, and it wasn't.
Right. Well, and here's the thing. So I want it's a distinction with a difference. So by statute, it was not binding. However, by party rule,
yes,
the presidential preference primary was in fact binding. I know that because I wrote that into the rules for the 2016 cycle.
But the party could have changed the rule and made it non-binding, right?
They could have changed it, but the party wanted it to be binding. RNC wanted a binding process. And so that's one of the reasons that we did that. There are some other reasons too, but that's why we did that. And so, yes, but it is a party rule. So now what we had to do is come up with a true caucus system. So for anyone if they're wonky political people like we are, they understand how Iowa does caucuses. So this new system is to be very similar to that Iowa caucus system.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts of it. The big debate nationally on caucuses, and having done caucuses prior to the primary personally and then post-primary, I've seen it both ways. The big debate is Do you do winner take all for the delegates that come out, or do you do plurality voting? And in looking at the rules that are out there, it looks like maybe y'all have kind of come up with a hybrid of that I haven't seen in every other party's plans.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. It is, in fact, a hybrid. So when you show up at your caucus, you're going to register. The party will have an ability for you to register in advance. I strongly suggest you do that. It will make your day easier. You'll show up at your caucus. You will be credentialed. You'll sit down. You'll elect the chair. You'll elect the secretary. They'll go over the rules. Now, this is really important. So in years past, the caucus set up their own rules. Okay? The rules now are set up for you, and you cannot change them. If the local caucus changes the rules, they can and will lose their delegates, or the party will then choose who those delegates are and who they're bound to. So don't do that. So now you're going to show up at the caucus, and you're, unlike in years past where we've had the way Missouri has done caucuses, someone is actually going to stand up and say, I nominate Donald J. Trump. I nominate Nikki Haley. And you're going to go through that process. And then they're going to caucus. They're actually going to stand up. They're going to divide up into groups around the room so they're going to caucus with Trump people or Haley people or whoever, right? So now that's kind of your first vote, right? A standing division vote of the people in the room. At that point, any eligible nominated candidate that gets less than 15% of the vote in the room is out. So those people now have two choices. They can go home, which I don't recommend, or they will be given 30 minutes. They will be given time to realign themselves as one of the surviving candidate caucuses. That, by the way, came out of Iowa. That's an Iowa rule. So now you've taken that group out. They've realigned themselves. Now you're going to take what's really essentially your last vote. And that is either going to have a simple majority, which is 50% plus one, or you'll have a plurality where nobody has 50% plus one. Now, in some other states, if you have a plurality, you're going to keep voting and debating and whatever until you have that true majority. Or you just have a plurality. Well, in this case, we decided the time was important. Caucuses take a lot of time. People have to be there for that, the large chunk of their day on that Saturday morning, March 2nd, 10 a.m. And so we said, okay, we're going to take that vote, and either it's a simple majority, in which case it's winner take all, or it's a plurality, and now we're going to go down a whole different road.
And this is just fascinating here, and you're doing a very good job of explaining it, but I guarantee you people are having a hard time following it, listening. And no offense to you, you're doing a great job. What I don't understand, while you've been on the air, I looked up a story I did, because I covered this exclusively at Missouri Net. I covered a couple here, not exclusively, but I did several interviews, and I believe at least one of them was the only one in the room when the Secretary of State testified. But I'm looking back at my story. And Mark will remember this. 1986, the legislature adopted the presidential preference primary for a PPP to be held in 1988. We all know that was done to help Richard Gephardt, who ran for president. But then there was also an effort to help John Ashcroft when he was running for president in 2000. So both parties have done it. And what I don't know, I'm not a lawyer here, so maybe Mark or Stephanie or you can help me. In 1998, I reported, I know this for a fact, the Missouri legislature approved a PPP with no expiration date. Governor Carnahan signed that. So did that get repealed? Or I'm confused by that. So that has been repealed. Okay.
Yeah, they took that out when they did the Voter Integrity Act 2 years ago.
And that did not get nearly the coverage I think it should have.
And that's that's exactly why we wanted to talk to Chris today, because absolutely. I think a lot of people are going to be confused. And Chris, you glossed over, you said that date really quickly, we're going to talk about calendaring, Hannah, but these are dates that for next spring, if you want to be a part of it and we want you to be involved, you've got to get these on your calendar, because it could be an all-day thing, hopefully not, but you're going to want these dates. Chris, what are the important dates?
Yeah, so let me set this up for you, because this was part of the strategy that the chairman of the Missouri Republican Party, the executive director, myself, others worked on. So Lincoln Days is in mid-February. The caucus is March the 2nd at 10 a.m. It is the last event before Super Tuesday nationally, which could give Missouri some relevance. People want, a head of steam going into Super Tuesday. The Congressional District Convention will be April the 6th. And then the Missouri Republican State Convention will be May the 4th. And I'm in trouble for that because that's my wife's birthday.
Oh, no. So that first date, that March date is a local, or March 2nd, sorry, is the local caucus date. So that's the initial date we want to be concerned with. All right, we are talking with Chris Grahn-Howard, and he is the architect of this new caucus system and the chair of the GOP Convention Rules Committee.
Chris, about out of time, but I remember when we talked to some of the lawmakers that were proponents of the presidential primary system, and they made the argument, I don't know how valid it was, that, if somebody's a first responder or a medical professional, they couldn't get freed up to get off that day, and then talked about some smaller counties in the system that didn't have venues big enough. Did you buy into those arguments?
Well, I mean, I wasn't a part of, obviously I wasn't in the legislature, so I wasn't a part of that particular part of the conversation. The problem is that this kind of caucus system is an exclusionary event. If you can't be there on March the 2nd at 10 a.m. and stay for several hours, you've been disenfranchised from participating in the process. I don't like it when we do that. While I'm proud of the system I helped create, I would rather not have done it. As far as the venue issue, listen, that's a problem no matter what, because we're still going to have a caucus. It was just a simpler process. But now you're asking everyone who wants to show up. So now you're going to have hundreds of people. I mean, I've been traveling around the state doing trainings on the weekends, and some of these counties are going to be overwhelmed.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we did this, what year did we do caucusing when our timeline was really off? We were at the schools.
2012.
Yeah, we were at the schools. And for the most part, I feel like the schools worked really well. Well, we are absolutely running out of time, but I do think this is fascinating. I think, we want folks in mid-Missouri to be prepared to get that date on their calendars. And I think we're going to have you back to kind of walk through some of these rules, because I think, I think there's probably some strategy that goes in here as well.
There is.
And so I think we're going to want to walk through the process and help people get prepared as we approach that March date. Anything else you want to say, just generally, where can people find out more information if they're interested in actually reading the rules or seeing the dates?
Yeah, so it's real important if you're a Republican or Republican leaning and you want to participate, all of this will be, I don't know that it's there yet, but it will be. All the rules, the entire call to convention, the dates, times, all that will be available on the mogop.org website. Your ability to pre-register will eventually be loaded in there. You'll be able to pre-register before the event. So I would stick to that. You guys, anytime you want me to come back, I'm advocating for as much knowledge about this process as possible. One, because I want it to go well, and two, I want people to feel like they had a chance to participate.
Another question that's come up recently, too, with the changes in the law is, I know you can now indicate that you're a Republican through the Secretary of State's office.
Affiliate.
Affiliate, yes, thank you. That's the term I was looking for. So are you, do you have to affiliate in order to participate in the caucus, or can anyone show up?
No, you do not. Now, if you show up and you will be given a pledge that you have to sign saying, I'm a good and faithful Republican, I believe in free markets. I'm summarizing it because I don't have it right in front of me, but you'll sign that. And then that's your pledge, so to speak, to
he can only give us the twist that he can give us. I don't know what the words are there, but
Well,
with a special twist.
I'll start with the futures. They're mixed. The Dow and NASDAQ are down after a huge blockbuster day yesterday. S&P is up. Caterpillar had a big hit today and really did well. JetBlue was down. Travel industry struggling. And speaking of the travel industry, many people when they go out, they want to get a dinner reservation. And some restaurants are hard to get into. Some are easy. But you notice all these years it's been increasingly hard to get concert tickets. And it's because the bots have taken over and they get involved in snatching up all the hard-to-get tickets. Well, the new trend in dining is bots are seizing dinner reservations for good restaurants, ones that are popular, and then are being sold on the secondary market. And restaurants, God bless them, are fighting back. But it's going to cost you. Because the solution to fighting back against the bots is more and more restaurants are now going to require a reservation fee or a reservation deposit. Sometimes it's $20, sometimes it's $50. Bigger restaurants, it's $100 just to have a reservation, and that might be a non-refundable fee.
I've had to pay the restaurant reservation fee. That's crazy, but I think we're moving that way, and it's always just more of a burden on us, which is really frustrating. With the respect to the concert tickets, I know the state fair was fighting back this year against the bots, and it actually, we were taking a huge crowd there. We were taking like 30 people. They would only allow you to purchase the tickets 10 at a time, and they all had to be on a different credit card. It took us half a day to purchase tickets as legitimate people. It was so frustrating because of the bots.
Yeah, there's no good answer to it. In the old days, you had to go to a ticket window in person. That at least solved
affecting us here in Missouri, but also in surrounding states. And I think that matters. And we've seen people, people are just going to run to Illinois to get an abortion, or maybe they'll run. And Kansas has surprised and shocked everyone with their abortion policy. Now, I think people were confused about the vote they had last year, but now it's back. Their abortion restrictions are back in court.
So here's the interesting thing. This is why these abortion IPs have real life implication in addition to just the political implication, which is the Kansas Supreme Court is throwing out all of the legislative restrictions that have been passed over abortion over the many years in Kansas, not just the ones that they've tried to tee up to get, litigation on. They're throwing out restrictions on safeties in clinics. They're doing parental notification. They've taken the position that this new IP or this new constitutional amendment that was passed in Kansas a couple of years ago basically says the legislature is entirely out and abortion's an unrestricted right in Kansas now. And I don't think anybody in Kansas thought it meant unrestricted right.
Right.
And that's what it's become, because that's how the court is interpreting it. And that is clearly what the proponents of the one that was in court yesterday, that's clearly what they want. They want the unrestricted right to have abortion. The alternate measure that's out there is more of a 15-week limitation, which is very popular politically. But the big ones are unrestricted rights with no government regulation whatsoever, including clinic safety, parental notification, age verification, any of that stuff.
And so we would think, even after this court case that was heard yesterday, and if it gets on the ballot and if we vote, ultimately the abortion issue is probably going to end up back in the courts on the merits, perhaps affecting our existing laws on abortion.
Which goes to show why the Missouri Supreme Court is so important. We now have a majority Republican appointees.
A majority of women.
Majority of women. If an abortion IP gets passed, it's going to end up in the Supreme Court, and they're the ones that are going to have to address how it works with all of our laws. And that's going to be a really fascinating process to see play out. It's why those appointments make a difference, and it's why we should pay attention to it.
And we should. And I would just caution everybody, when the governor appointed, and I'm just picking one issue because it was the first one, Robin Ransom was appointed to the Missouri Supreme Court. Very first issue that came before her was Medicaid expansion. And conventionalism at the Capitol, she'll vote with the governor. Well, she did not. In fact, the Supreme Court was unanimous. Again, and that funding mechanism, I'm still confused by that. But they basically, because Chuck Hatfield argued they did fund. If you remember, he said they did fund it, but they funded through the appropriation. So it was a very.
We're very familiar.
Oh
with
yeah,
that
you guys.
It's somewhat bitter about it. Let's just be honest.
Exactly. And I know Chuck's probably laughing, listening right now. But I'd also make one more point. You guys mentioned Kansas. And I know things have changed, times have changed, but in 1974, Bob Dole almost lost his seat. He darn near got beat by a very little known Democrat congressman, but Dole says he didn't have anything to do with it. The churches on that Sunday morning put out abortion flyers and said this congressman supported. I believe they said he supported partial birth abortion. He says he did not, but in the end, everyone pretty much said the abortion issue decided that. But Kansas has. It's kind of weird. They've elected Laura Kelly, but yet rural Kansas, Mark, still appears to be pretty red.
So the old joke used to be in Missouri politics that a Kansas Republican was more liberal than a Missouri Democrat. That doesn't apply anymore, needless to say. The problem you've got in Kansas is you have a rural. It's analogous to Missouri, a rural base that is incredibly conservative. And two major population centers, Wichita, but more particularly the Kansas City suburbs, which are trending, like all urban areas are, trending more Democrat. And then there's this little thing called candidate selection.
That's right.
And when you put up Chris Kobach, who was the gubernatorial candidate, you're going to lose. Period.
Yeah.
You want ideological purity of your candidate, you lose. That's just A equals B. There's no deviation there. And people don't recognize Kansas is not a 75% Republican state. It's a 54% Republican state. So a bad candidate costs you elections.
Well, and when we talk about, the alleged red wave in 2022, so I think many of those losses that it came down to bad candidate selection. I mean, in so many ways. And I think, but in some ways you could have the best candidate who might have the wrong letter behind their name or party behind their name, and you still aren't going to get very far. We've got third parties in Missouri that are fighting for space on the ballot. Now, even if they come out with a great candidate, they don't stand a chance, right?
Well, the Green Party is trying to get on the ballot. They need 10,000 signatures by the end of July, I think, to get on the ballot. They say they're halfway there. There's going to be litigation over it. The Democrats will fight them vociferously. But if they get on the ballot,
what?
So the Democrats
Anna's confused by your grammar.
Can you spell the word and give us the origin?
You would vociferously? Come on. So they fight that tremendously, and there's a lot of folks that think the Green Party has cost Democrats presidential elections by taking 3 or 4% of the vote. We will potentially have some state races, not statewide in all likelihood, but some state, rep or Senate, or even maybe some county races that could be very, very close. And if the Green Party gets certified as a political party, they can automatically put their own candidates on the ballot. They don't have to circulate petitions for a candidate to get on a ballot. And if they get 3% in a race that's decided, we saw a bunch of state rep seats this last time around that were decided by less than 400 votes.
That's right.
You get 3% in a state rep seat, that might change an election, particularly if that 3% comes off of the Democrats. And that's really what hurts them. And they fight this stuff vociferously.
Well, and
use the word Ralph Nader when you need him, right?
Well, and I was going to bring up Ralph Nader. I mean, everybody talks about the butterfly ballot, and they can talk about Katherine Harris, but the reality is, you look at the votes Ralph Nader got in 2000 in Florida. If he's not in the race, I assume they're going to voted for Gore. Gore would have won.
Jill Stein in Michigan with Trump and Hillary Clinton. The Democrats are convinced, aside from their collusion garbage, they're convinced that Jill Stein's 2.7% that she got in Michigan cost them the national election.
Yeah, I remember that, and I definitely remember Nader. The only independent, Stephanie and Mark, to your point, John may remember this. The only independent I ever remember being our third party being elected, and he ran as an independent, was 1996 or 1998. It was a guy named Denny Meredith, a state representative from Caruthersville, and he caucused with the Democrats. But that was basically unheard of.
Greg White was elected sheriff of Cole County as a third-party candidate, not a Republican or Democrat. And I'll give you another really great one, not from Missouri though. Jesse the Body Ventura was elected governor of Minnesota as a third-party independent candidate, and so was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, it's true. And Ventura won in 98, but it was Meredith. But then he caucused with the Democrats, and then he was term limited out. Yep. So it's pretty hard to win. And the only other thing I'd point out, Mark, you're so right about, the Republicans have just a stranglehold on the rural seats. But if you look at Derek Grier's seat in Chesterfield that went open, you look at those seats in St. Charles, and you look at West County. When I was growing up, there were no Democrats in West St. Louis County. I mean, they didn't exist. There were only a handful. My grandmother was one of them out there.
When you think about
Yellow Dog Democrat, but John, these Democrats have really cut into the Republican margins, at least in the vote margins. Some of those seats they're going 52-48. I mean, they're close. They're close.
Well, you talk about third parties, and gosh, Mark can relate about the Reform Party and Ross Perot and the spoiler that he played.
Yeah,
92.
Yeah, a couple times. He was also on the ballot in 96 too. I mean, it was really tough.
And then I guess they're not technically a party, but whatever happened to those Jay Nixon, No Limits, people? They were out there saying they were going to nominate somebody. Are they gone?
They are still out there working to get on ballot access in a number of states.
And that would be probably Joe Manchin, I'm going to guess. But yes, Nixon's involved. Now, whether they perceive it, Mark's absolutely right. They're still doing that. Jay Nixon did come on our program and talk about it, and the progressives were not happy. They weren't happy with him. But again, they were basically saying that, basically talking about his influence and stuff. But say this, he was elected 4 times as Attorney General, twice as governor. So Mark, I believe, elected 6 times statewide. I know he lost the 2 Senate races, so he definitely has some credibility.
But certainly if the Democrats perceive the Green Party as a threat, they would perceive this No Limits candidate too, and you double up, these extra candidates, and it could add up in important areas.
Yeah, and the analysis of the No Labels candidate, the last stuff that I've seen out there on it from some polling and some focus group is it's really bad for Republicans.
Oh, yeah.
It actually cuts against, assuming Donald Trump is the nominee, assuming Donald Trump is the nominee, it cuts dramatically against Republicans. The doesn't work the same with other Republican candidates. And interestingly, No Labels has said that if Donald Trump and Joe Biden are not the two respective party nominees, they will not go forward.
Interesting. What's the last time you were on our program? I think you said you thought it was going to be Gavin Newsom. I think he stands less of a chance now that he flattened that kid in the basketball game. But you still think
he flattened?
Have you seen the video?
I guess not.
He's done more than Joe Biden does with China because he went to China and knocked a kid over. So that's better than what Biden's done.
Look at the Twitter. It is not good.
Did you just say the Twitter?
The Twitter. Look at the Twitter.
Stephanie, I'm so disappointed in you.
That would be the X.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
X, formerly known as Twitter.
That's right. Well, we're getting some text, too. Apparently, there are some other independent candidates. Mike Neal from Howard County. So apparently, Mid-Mo has elected independents. We will see if the Green Party makes the ballot. Would you know I don't know the deadline for that when they have to get all the signatures
July
turned in?
29th is their deadline.
All right. So they still got a bit of time.
And then it would make for real interesting getting people onto the ballots for November because you get in a real short time frame at that point.
Wow. All right. Well, coming up next on Wake Up Mid-Missouri, we will do Leftover. Missourian is announcing, has an article about Bryce Beal. He has announced a campaign for House District 44. Of course, John Martin has already announced for that seat, currently held by Representative Reich. And then we've also heard that friend of the show, Hannah, Dave Rathel, is also... if you check out our Facebook page, well, he's
maybe not.
He likes to comment a lot on our stuff. He is has said that he plans to run on the Democratic side for that same seat. John,
I wish him luck.
John, what's in your fridge?
Well, there was a vigil last night for that little boy whose body was found 5 years ago. Was at Washington Park. It was little Darnell Gray. And the woman charged in his death, Quatavia Given, she's facing murder charges. She was his caregiver, and it was pretty grim. She even joined in the search for him. They said he was missing and all. She's now getting mental health treatment to even see if she's going to be fit to stand trial or not in the little boy's death. It's been 5 years since little Darnell Gray was murdered in Jefferson City.
That's hard to believe. All right. Also, an announcement out of Boone County. We talked about there are city races next spring. If you're interested in serving on the Boone Hospital Board of Trustees, you will want to go ahead and file an application. The Boone County Commission is accepting applications. That there was a position that was vacated by Greg Steinhoff, and so they're going to appoint that. But then, it would need to be elected after that. So we're always encouraging our folks to get involved. And to, if you have opinions, don't just sit around and complain about them, but get out there and get on these boards, run for office if you can, or support others who are doing that. So anyway, they are accepting applications. Mark, what do you got for leftovers?
So if you've ever taken your kids to a restaurant and they've run around like crazy people, guilty as charged right here. There's a restaurant in North Georgia that charges $50 as a fine for bad parenting in the restaurant. There was a family who came in, had 9 kids. They ran all over the place terrorizing the other diners, and he actually had created a policy and posted it in advance saying you could be fined for it. He charged them $50. So
who is the arbiter of that?
The owner, of course.
I don't know about that. I mean, we can all be subject of like a bad day, like your kids are having a bad day and you're having a bad day. I don't know. I think that's a tough one for me, but I will say, like, I was at a local sporting event and there was kids playing video games with their volume full up. And I thought,
is that on Stephanie's suck list?
I thought I was gonna have like an anxiety attack. The noise from the video game was so loud and right in my ear. And I've gone to restaurants too, full blast video games or like Cocoa Melon, like some sort of. And I'm like, at least bring some headphones.
So what's even worse than that is people who do phone calls on speaker phones in restaurants. Those people need to like just be excused from the society for a moment. Till
I will
done.
go a step further if we're on Stephanie's suck list because Mark heard a flurry of cuss words come out of my mouth. It is 2023. If you need to remind me of appointments and you are still making that long phone call that plays like this long message about when my appointment is and you're not sending a text message, I am going to look for a different provider.
Wow.
Just know that.
Wow.
Just know that.
Hey, in defense of Mark, at least when Mark goes to spring training, he'll duck down the tunnel to take his personal phone calls.
I did. I even got a baseball off of that when I voted for the Senate reapportionment map 12 years ago, 11 years ago. Had a ball hit me in the foot.
It had a good story to go with it.
I did. It was great. On live on speakerphone. Everybody got to hear me.
Well, I hope you all are excited. Mark will be back joining us for a Feel Good Friday this Friday. But tomorrow, and Randy Tobler will be here with us on Thursday, but tomorrow we've got a big show lined up. John, can you give us some more details about what we can expect?
Jefferson City State Rep Dave Griffith will be co-hosting with us for the Wake Up Mid-Missouri show. We'll be talking Cole County Presiding Commissioner Sam Bushman. Representative Rudy Veit will swing by and join us as well. So presumably, we'll hear a bunch about the Capitol and the 2024 session plans.
And wasn't it Representative Veit who really who was it that was really opposed to this caucusing system?
Rudy Veit definitely wanted the primaries to come back.
I think so. And so I'd be interested, to hear his response to Chris on the show today, because that was a very divided issue last year in the legislature, and they didn't get anything done, but it wasn't just about that. They just didn't get anything done. So I want to hear more about
we'll
that
get Rudy's
from him.
take for sure.
Rudy's very keen on a lot of election issues. It's a important point for him. It will be interesting to hear his thoughts on it now that it's too late to change anything.
Now, if you missed the explanation today about the new caucus process, I think it's going to be a really fascinating process. And Mark and I were already kind of discussing how the numbers are going to shake out. So you're going to want to go back and listen to that. We've got many ways you can find our past interviews. So you can, Hannah, watch us on Facebook
and YouTube.
And where do they find us on YouTube?
At Wake Up in Missouri.
All right. You can also check out our amazing